Anyone else remember Back4Blood? The game was intended to be a spiritual successor to the 2008 masterpiece of Left 4 Dead 2. There was a lot of hype leading up to the release of the game. It was being developed by Turtle Rock Studios, the former devs who had actually worked on Left 4 Dead along with Valve. This game had every chance to take the OG game's formula and modernize it for a new audience. Yet, we look at the game now, almost 5 years later after its release in 2021, and it has been all but abandoned, not only by the developers, but the players too. So what led us here? To truly understand the potential of this game, we have to go back to Left 4 Dead. At its core, the game is simple. Survive from point A to point B with 3 teammates. The simplicity really worked to the game's favor, as there was no leveling up or loadouts, it was just about the gameplay. This made it so the only real difference between a veteran and a noob was skill. It gave the game a really relaxed, casual vibe, as you could pretty much pick it up whenever you want and not have to worry about any external factors. This, combined with the game's simple controls and shooting mechanics, made it very accessible for anybody. That's not to say that the game wasn't hard, it certainly could get crazy at times, but the barrier of entry was way easier to get over. This allowed the game to really explode in popularity. It sold 2 million copies in its first 2 weeks of release, and has continued to sell since with an estimated 50 to 60 million copies sold worldwide across all platforms over the last 17 years. During its development, Valve acquired Turtle Rock Studios. Turtle Rock were primarily known for creating Counter-Strike maps in the early 2000s. It was only in 2005 to 2006 that they started working on a co-op zombie survival game that went by the name of Terror at the time. Valve, noticing this, helped refine and fund the project. So for all intents and purposes, Turtle Rock were the main original minds behind both games. Despite the immense success of Left 4 Dead, not everything was well behind the scenes. Valve and Turtle Rock were constantly butting heads due to creative differences that led to a very slow content cycle for the game. This would eventually lead to Turtle Rock deciding to split from Valve in 2010 to become an independent studio. However, under this split, Turtle Rock Studio had lost ownership over the Left 4 Dead franchise, as it was now owned by Valve. This meant that whatever creative endeavors they decided to take, they would have to be completely original and not derivative of any former IPs created under Valve.
We were already a separate studio, right? Valve retains Left 4 Dead, the IP, and they signed us back our logo and name.
Were you sad you had to leave the IP for Left 4 Dead behind though?
Well, yeah, sure, but I mean, that's games.
Turtle Rock's first attempt came out in the form of Evolve in 2015, a 1v4 asymmetrical multiplayer shooter. Sadly, this wouldn't pan out anywhere near as well as they had likely hoped. Upon launch, Evolve would face immense criticism, with it being one of the first games to have an always online dependency, a trend which many games would follow in the footsteps of after. Additionally, the game's balance was a mess, and there were over $130 worth of DLC skins on top of the game's $60 asking price, which for today's standards isn't even that crazy, but for the time it definitely was. In a desperate attempt to make the game work, Turtle Rock even tried making the game free to play, but it still wasn't enough to save it. It barely lasted 3 years before the servers were shut down. Evolve's failure left Turtle Rock in limbo. They had to downsize and rebuild, financially and creatively. The team started working on smaller projects, VR experiments, prototypes, while searching for a new big IP to restore their name. For their next attempt at a AAA release, they looked towards their past successes, namely the Left 4 Dead franchise obviously, which was still doing very well despite not receiving a single additional entry after the second. The game was mainly surviving off of community-made content in the Steam Workshop, as well as its genuinely amazing core gameplay loop that no other game had since been able to capture. Turtle Rock, seeing this, clearly realized they had an opportunity to recapture the magic of Left 4 Dead in a modern title. After all, they were the company who originally made it. So they began working on Back4Blood, and it would be officially announced on March 14th of 2019, and from the creators of Left 4 Dead. That being said, there was over a decade between these two games being produced, so it should come as no surprise that the company was comprised of very different people after all these years. Many of those who worked at Turtle Rock originally had left after the split to work at Valve, and even more so had moved on after the failure of Evolve. So those who still remained after all this time to work on Back4Blood was very limited to say the least, and that would become abundantly clear in the first beta. The consensus during the beta was that it was generally considered good, but was quite clearly a departure from Left 4 Dead 2, and certainly did not recapture it beyond its core gameplay loop being similar. The first noticeable red flag was the shooting system. Turtle Rock had dropped the beautifully simplistic gunplay of Left 4 Dead in exchange for a very streamlined, typical shooting system akin to what we see in nearly every shooter game. This sucked, as one of the best elements of Left 4 Dead was its gunplay, which allowed you to be both accurate and mobile at the same time. It gave the game a flow and unique feel compared to other games. Not adopting and modernizing the system was a big mistake. The beta also revealed a brutal difficulty. Even on standard settings, players were overwhelmed. Special ridden spawned constantly, ammo felt scarce, and casual squads were wiped again and again. Not a very good first impression. Back 4 Blood would officially launch on October 7th, 2021. They pushed it hard with marketing, and most importantly, it launched day one on Xbox Game Pass. That gave the game an enormous initial player base, over 6 million players in its first month. However, the cracks showed almost immediately. The first controversy came from the solo mode. Just like Evolve, Back 4 Blood was designed as always online. And at launch, solo players couldn't even progress. No supply points, no achievements, no unlocks, nothing. If you weren't in co-op, the game punished you hard. This sparked instant backlash and forced Turtle Rock to issue a patch later, but the damage was already done. It was extremely co-op dependent, and this resulted in a game getting a lot of hate. Left 4 Dead 2 was a game that could be equally enjoyed co-op as well as offline, which gave it its timeless appeal. There was no internet requirement to access 90% of what it had to offer. Sadly though, the comparisons to Left 4 Dead wouldn't end here. In fact, a lot of the criticism the game faced would be a result of comparison rather than criticism on its own merit. And that's just one of the issues that came with the game more or less branding itself as an unofficial Left 4 Dead 3. You can't really blame people for making that comparison. Now honestly, this would be fine and all if it was being compared to many of the other games which were released in that early 2000s era of gaming. However, this was being compared to a game which was damn near perfect. One which no game since had seriously tried to compete with due to it being so incredibly good. So really, Left 4 Dead is the last game you want to be compared with, because when you do, oh my god, does it make Back 4 Blood look pathetic in comparison. It was a downgrade in nearly every aspect. Yes, even graphics. Okay, I mean sure, on the surface level, Back 4 Blood is a better looking game. I mean obviously, it's a whole different generation of hardware. However, it's when you actually look a little deeper, you start to realize how Left 4 Dead 2 just looks better. The character models in Back 4 Blood are okay, but they are honestly very stiff and unpolished looking, especially when in animation. Compared to Left 4 Dead 2, where they got detailed photograph scans of real people to create the characters and better animate their facial expressions to give them a very realistic look. The characters in Back 4 Blood look very stiff as they run around. It's like very little attention was put into how they look from other players' perspectives. Moving on from character animations, you might also notice when playing both games is how Back 4 Blood's campaign acts all look very much the same. Every single location is lit exactly the same, and this sucks, because what made Left 4 Dead 2 so replayable is how much variety there was in the visual identity of the campaigns. Like, you're not gonna mistake Dark Carnival with Dead Air, or Blood Harvest with No Mercy. Additionally, the objectives of each campaign in Left 4 Dead 2 are very clear. Usually, it involves the characters progressing through an area to try and reach safety in the form of some sort of vehicle, and as you play, you feel invested in succeeding just to get the hell out of there. In contrast with Back 4 Blood, I never really feel invested in what I'm doing or really care, and this ties into a separate issue with there being next to no emotional investment with the characters themselves. Despite the voice actors doing a good job in my opinion, none of the characters are very memorable at all. In this game, the survivors are called cleaners and work for a settlement called Fort Hope. Their job is essentially to go in and clear out the infected from strongholds to keep humanity safe. So essentially, they are armed, trained, and purposely putting themselves into these scenarios. I hate this, as it significantly takes away from so much story potential. In Left 4 Dead 2, the survivors are not really trained or prepared to fight in a zombie apocalypse, but due to unfortunate scenarios, they are forced to. For a few examples, you've got Bill, a retired and worn down war vet who really serves as the strategic planner of the group. You've got Zoe, a college student, still living with her parents when the outbreak hit, which forced her to grow up fast. Lewis is an IT worker who was working in an office in like a cubicle before the world collapsed. And finally you've got Francis, who's a biker and outlaw type, covered in tattoos and sarcastic. They all come from very different backgrounds, as you can see, and they certainly don't all get along. But regardless, they know that if they're going to have any chance of surviving, they're going to need to cooperate with each other. There's no big settlement they return to at the end of a mission, or anyone they're working for. They are completely on their own, with no big light at the end of the tunnel. Yet, this doesn't stop them from having some funny banter throughout the campaigns. However, these jokes come across as them just trying to make light of a bad situation.
You think one day it's all just gonna go back to normal?
I'll see peace back on Earth if I gotta murder every one of these bastards with my bare goddamn hands. That's what I'm talking about. Damn straight.
While in Back 4 Blood, it's like they're just joking to be funny. This unorthodox group of people coming together to fight is what makes them so endearing. While I appreciate Turtle Rock for attempting to give the cleaners some characterization, it ultimately falls flat because you just don't care. In Left 4 Dead 2, you follow the survivors from pretty much the start of the outbreak. You experience everything for the first time with them, and you can relate to how they're feeling. But in Back 4 Blood, the outbreak inception is very much past tense. They've already adapted to their situation, so you miss all of that potential development of them coming to terms with the state of the world. Back 4 Blood feels like it should be a third or fourth installment in the franchise, not the first when it comes to narrative and characterization. It's like the most interesting story that could be told, i.e. the start of the outbreak, is already told, and this is like the epilogue where they live in this settlement and kill zombies as a means to work. It's such a shame because I definitely think they could have potential, but the game just sort of expects you to like them instantly without any kind of development. Like genuinely, could you even name most of these dudes after playing the campaign? I certainly couldn't. Now you may be thinking I'm going on too much about the characters. I mean, this is a video game, not a movie or TV show. They only serve as placeholders for you to shoot zombies with. But to me, it's important because the characters are what shape the immersion and perspective of the world you are fighting in. If they aren't up to par, then it's going to be hard for you to really care about any of what's going on around them, and thus makes the game feel hollow as a result. To conclude, even if you're just playing the game casually without looking into the backgrounds of any of the characters, these will come across as unique, interesting, and lovable, while these will come across as bland, generic, and forgettable. Going back to the campaigns, as I've mentioned, you really just don't care about what's going on because you have no investment in the characters you're playing. But also, just what you're doing ain't that interesting. All the campaigns not only look very samey, but also play very samey. And sure, you could say the same about Left 4 Dead 2's campaigns, as I suppose both games are just zombie shooters at the end of it all. But at least with Left 4 Dead 2, there was a significant effort put into giving the campaign some sort of unique aspect, like Dark Carnival for an example. In this campaign, you progress through an abandoned carnival to try find some sort of safety, fighting off zombies, special infecteds, and even clowns. And then for the final act, in a last-ditch effort to get the hell out of the twisted place, you have to blast music on the stage to hopefully attract the attention of a chopper to save you. But this also happens to attract hundreds of zombies to your position, so you have to hold out as long as it takes for a chopper to come by, which in the context of the characters themselves, they don't even 100% know if a chopper is going to come in the first place, so doing this could be suicide for them, but they try regardless. Or take a look at Dead Air, where you literally progress through a goddamn airport and escape with a literal plane. I could go on and on, but the point is, Left 4 Dead 2 puts a lot more effort into actually giving the campaign some variety. You don't get anything like this in Back 4 Blood. Like, there's the one mission where you plant a bomb on a boat and explode it. That was kinda cool, I guess. Well, at least if you try your hardest to forget the time where you blew up an entire bridge in Left 4 Dead 2. You've got that one mission where you need to activate a jukebox which attracts the zombies in the final act. Hey, that's cool, even though it's infinitely less cool when you compare it to the finale of Dark Carnival where you activate an entire stage. Yeah, really the moment you start comparing Back 4 Blood to Left 4 Dead, a lot of its good elements just kind of flop, because it's like, oh well, that's a cool thing you did there, but a game from 10 years prior already did it, and was like infinitely more awesome. With that being said, what about the overall gameplay in Back 4 Blood? It should be more fun. Surely, that's where the effort went, since it's been 10 years to really perfect. So one of the most groundbreaking features in Left 4 Dead was the presence of the mysterious director. To explain its role as simply as possible, the director would tailor the match based on how the team was performing. For example, if the survivors were breezing through certain sections of a campaign, the director would identify this and start increasing the zombie spawns, or start limiting the amount of healing or ammo scattered around to try and make it more challenging. Likewise, if the survivors were struggling, the director would ease off on the zombies and maybe be more generous with the ammo and healing drops. It goes much deeper than this, but that is the general idea. Of course, Turtle Rock would try and implement a similar feature in Back 4 Blood. However, in contrast to Left 4 Dead 2, the AI of the director was very limited. It would see players doing good and just throw everything at them, causing major and noticeable difficulty spikes that were just not fun. While the director in Left 4 Dead 2 was very subtle, the one in Back 4 Blood was quite the opposite. You could feel in real time the artificial difficulty increases, rather than soft alterations that would build up over time. Clearly, whoever was originally responsible for the system was no longer working for Turtle Rock with the development of Back 4 Blood, as it really served as more of a nuisance to players rather than an appreciated addition that helped spice up the variety of the games. One of the absolute most mind-boggling additions to Back 4 Blood was the card system. Essentially, these cards would allow you to customize your loadout, giving you specific buffs and trade-offs that allowed you to tailor the gameplay and personalize your experience. Now, this would be a good idea in like an RPG game, but may I remind you that this is a game where we shoot zombies. Why do we need a system like this? In Left 4 Dead 2, you open the game and load into a match. That's it. There was no loadout personalization or anything like that. Everyone was on a level playing field, which is why it succeeded. It focused on accessibility where the difficulty would come later. But I just can't imagine what a new player would be thinking seeing the 191 unique cards they can use. Like, who asked for this, genuinely? Who looked at Left 4 Dead 2 and said, you know what this needs? More complication. It's just baffling to think the amount of time that was dedicated to this system. I mean, I remember accidentally equipping a card that stopped me from being able to ADS, and then just not knowing how to unequip it, so I was stuck just hip firing for the rest of the campaign. Great. Can we also just talk about how much of a downgrade the Special Infected were? I mean, what happened? If you don't know, the Special Infected in Left 4 Dead were mutated versions of the regular Infected that had specific gameplay traits which the survivors would have to deal with. What's most dangerous about the Special Infected is that if caught by one, you could only be saved by your teammates. They essentially served as a way to ensure the team sticks together, as the game director would intentionally make a point of spawning more in if you were alone. They encouraged positive team-orientated gameplay, and also created a necessary distraction from the regular zombies. All of them were visually distinct and recognizable, and even came with their own little music sting as they spawned in, which only experienced players would be able to recognize. Now we bring our attention to Back 4 Blood's Special Infected, and they are just annoying. First of all, their designs. All of them look so similar. When I'm playing Left 4 Dead 2, I can easily tell the difference between a jockey, a hunter, or boomer, a spitter. But in Back 4 Blood, their designs are cool and grotesque, but they just blend into the crowd in the heat of battle. Like, you will just randomly get grabbed out of nowhere because they lack the distinct visual and audio nuance that sets them apart from everybody else. This couldn't be any more different to Left 4 Dead 2. The second you hear the sound of a Special Infected, one or two members of your team need to focus on dealing with them before you proceed. There's nothing in Back 4 Blood that matches the panic of getting grabbed by one of the Special Infected in Left 4 Dead 2 with that intense music. It's so great that they all have their own unique themes which create these crazy moments in game that are endlessly memorable and genuinely scary to be in. The intensity that they bring to the regular gameplay is completely unmatched in Back 4 Blood. They pale in comparison significantly. Now, if I were to break down each aspect of gameplay and compare between the two, I could be talking for days. I'll just put a list on screen of the things I think it does worse on that I didn't mention. However, to be fair, I should mention some of the things which I liked in Back 4 Blood. First off, we have the attachment system. I like the idea of being able to customize your weapon. It feels intuitive, and unlike the card system, it isn't overly convoluted and ham-fisted. The feeling of you getting slowly stronger as you progress through the campaign is very satisfying. That's a feeling you don't really get in Left 4 Dead. When it comes to the characters, as I've mentioned, I think the voice actors do a good job with what they are given, and there's some moments in the campaign where interesting stuff happens and you get some good dialogue.
My husband Ben hasn't been feeling right, so get what you need and be on your way. They told us it would probably clear up by itself, but should head down to that place they set up at the fairgrounds anyways. My dad wanted none of that. Well, can't trust those government types. Isn't that right, honey? That's why we decided to leave and go stay with my sister. Traffic's been something fierce though, but we make do, don't we, sugar?
Okay, we're just going to get what we need, and we'll be on our way.
Better than nothing, right?
Should we tell her that her husband's dead or just let it go? Okay, just let it go. Stuck? No way out? Make me go crazy. Like that lady and her husband. I didn't mean her husband was crazy, because he was dead. I mean, he might have been, before the whole death thing.
I like the weapon variety in Back 4 Blood. I especially enjoyed using the bow and arrow. And finally, the feeling of shooting zombies is very satisfying, as it should be. However, it is a bit disappointing that the zombies generally just die in a blood explosion. Sometimes they lose limbs, and that's about it. Nothing compares to Left 4 Dead 2's 780 different potential dismemberment combinations.
In Left 4 Dead 1 we provided only the ability to shoot off limbs. Now, in Left 4 Dead 2, there are 43 unique ways to damage an infected. Because many of these wounds are non-fatal, players are able to wound an infected more than once, resulting in about 780 possible damage combinations.
But there it is. Really, in no other game would I be criticizing or caring about the different death animations of zombies. But when you market your game as being a spiritual successor to Left 4 Dead 2, everything is put under the microscope. In just a few months after release, Left 4 Dead 2 had reclaimed the higher player count over Back 4 Blood. A few DLCs were added over time, with the last content drop being in December of 2022 with the River of Blood expansion. The game has since been forgotten by seemingly both the developers and its players. Looking back at both games, despite Turtle Rock being the most prominent mind behind most of the gameplay in Left 4 Dead, we should equally be attributing the game's success to Valve, who made a lot of changes during development, clearly to Turtle Rock's disapproval. These changes would ultimately shape the game into the success it became. You can research yourself how Valve, while not necessarily coming up with the game, made a lot of significant alterations. Valve as a company have proved before and after the split that they are able to not only create but maintain many successful franchises and keep them running, while Turtle Rock on the other hand has failed on both their attempts as an independent development team. And with the rumors of their next project being a sequel to Back 4 Blood, time will only tell if they can improve on their mistakes. But that's all for this video, thanks for watching. Also, I'm live on Twitch every single day, so if you're interested, come follow.